Thank you everyone for joining us for improving equity in public infrastructure. My name is Keyshawn Mistry. I'm manager of energy equity at Puget Sound Energy, a role that was created about 4 months ago. But I've been at PSC for about 12 years. Jen and I actually started a week apart, and now I know she's at PNNL, but I'll let her introduce herself. But I've been at PSC for 12 years. I've had multiple roles, started in energy efficiency, operations, IT, planning, and most recently, energy equity. And so I'll let the panel introduce themselves before we kind of get into the topic. I've asked them to talk, give us their names, what they do, who they work for, and then also, now that the summer's coming to an end, I've asked them to share us their most favorite moment from summer 2023. So Jen, I guess you can start off.
Great, thanks Keyshawn. Can you folks hear me okay? Awesome. So my name is Jennifer Yoshimura. I'm an advisor at Pacific Northwest National Lab in our electricity infrastructure division, and also an energy equity and environmental justice leader in our energy and environmental directorate. I lead our community technical assistance program, energy storage for social equity, as well as overseeing grid planning and integrated regional planning, focusing on decarb resilience and equity as well. And like Keyshawn shared, I have some utility experience working at PSC and HECO. But I'd say the highlight of my summer for 2023 is connecting with family that I haven't seen pre-COVID. So it was wonderful to re-engage and spend time with family and loved ones.
Hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany Kwan, and I'm a transportation engineer at City of Bellevue. I've been at Bellevue for a bit over a year. Previously, I was at SDOT for 3 years, and before that, WashDOT for a year. So I've been jumping around a bit. But I'm here as a worker bee that has been just not making policies or planning policies, but implementing them, and how it's affected my work in my beginning mid-level engineer life. My highlight of the summer is probably watching our family dog grow up and stomp around on the deck since it's nice and warm out for him.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Kevin Nectarline. I work for King County International Airport, Bowling Field, which is the smaller airport just a few miles north of SeaTac, kind of in the Georgetown South Park neighborhood. I've been there for about 4.5 years. I'm the capital planning manager there, managing our capital improvement program and our planning team. And I'm the co-lead for our DEI committee at the airport, and manage our internship program. So we're a small airport, so we wear a lot of different hats there, but I'm happy to be here. Oh, summer memory. Lots of fun stuff to pick from. But I think I'd also have to say, had a chance to go back and visit some family that don't get to see that often in the Midwest. So yeah, thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Candace Maldonado. I am the Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager for King County's Department of Human Resources. I am fairly new to the position, under a year, but I'm glad to be here with everyone today. I identify as Afro-Caribbean American. I'm a first-generation American citizen. My summer memory, there were so many of them, but actually most recently, it's not really the best, but it was like the funniest, is that my daughter broke her leg at her birthday party, and I thought she was gonna be so bummed about it, but she actually was like, I guess it's cool these days to go to school and have a cast and have your friends sign it. So she was extremely excited to get this pink cast and have all her classmates sign it, and she gave me a little bit of a reflection to have when she was getting the cast put on. She looked at the doctor and she said, "What do you wanna be when you grow up?" And I was like, she has no concept of like, oh, he is grown up. So just like giving us that little bit of childhood, and while we're out here in the sun and not taking ourselves too seriously. So glad to be here today.
Good morning, good people. Glad to be here to share this experience with y'all. John Miller, my pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager for King County. Been with King County going on 26 years now. So I'm a .gov lifer. I'm a father, son, husband. My favorite summer memory for 2023, my wife decided at the absolute last minute, the night before, that she wanted to attend her family reunion in Pueblo, Colorado. Never been, right? So we ended up finding a flight and booked a hotel and all that wonderfulness and went and had the time of our life kicking it with family. You talk about a really small town in Colorado. It was a cool experience. I got an affinity for Colorado, the state of Colorado, now that I've been there. Thank you.
Yeah, well, welcome and thank you for sharing. My favorite memories, I have a 21-month-old, and just taking him to the zoo and the aquarium and just seeing his reaction for the first time. We take a lot of these things for granted, but the smallest thing like the butterfly or seeing an ant, he's so intrigued by everything. And so the whole summer was just seeing him see things for the first time. So that was probably my entire summer. So. Now we'll get into kind of our topic. We met as a panelist last week, some via email, some we hopped on a call, and I asked everyone, what do you want to talk about? What are some talking points based on your role in your organizations that we want to discuss here at this conference or meeting? And everyone sent me the list, and I was able to kind of find some themes. The first theme was, why, right? Like why do we talk about equity, the impact, what happens if we don't? The second was engagement, right? Equity is all about engaging with the public and the communities that are impacted by the work that we do. And the third was tools and processes, right? At the end of the day, I'm an engineer by degree, and so this is all great, but how do we execute? How do we quantify? How do we measure, right? So those were the three things that came out. And so this panel discussion is going to be, broken down into those three topics. And so, we'll start with the impact of, we'll start with why and the impact of if we do and if we don't do this. And so, we'll start with Jen. And, can you tell us about the regulatory environment as it's related to equity and kind of some of the new things that are mandated and required at the federal, state, and even the local level, if you can?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Keyshawn. And I think, first off, want to give a lot of acknowledgement to the previous presenters, Maribel and Christina, because they really set the stage up for this. Mm-hmm. We have to recognize the historical racism, the redlining systems and institutions that still continue to perpetuate inequity. And the systems weren't created with equity, yet we're trying to get to equitable outcomes. And we see that through policies, laws, regulations at a federal level through Justice 40 initiatives, to state levels and regional levels, through, targeting greenhouse gas reduction emissions and decarbonization. Within Washington State, we have CETA, the Clean Energy Transformation Act, and CCA and the HEAL Act, all addressing environmental inequities and energy equity and environmental justice. And so as we see policies at the federal and state and local levels, we need to be aware of the historical context and constructs that have created inequities and created harms and burdens for communities. Historically, it's Black, Indigenous, tribal. It's your frontline communities that have the most harm and bearing the most burden from environmental hazards and air quality, lack of access and or limited access to energy service. Yet alone they have infrastructure and communities have infrastructure on land. And so helping kind of set the stage, within our region in the Northwest, it's really understanding the historical infrastructure and policies and laws, the burdens of communities that are still experiencing harms. And as we're looking at new infrastructure to address decarbonization, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and climate change and clean energy transitions from fossil fuels to wind and renewables, integrating distributed energy resources and battery technologies, what are the impacts to specific communities? Are the ones that are holding the most burden and harms, are they going to continue to perpetuate? Are we going to continue to perpetuate that as an industry? And then as we create programs with the best intentions for equity and for justice, are we considering the people that have had barriers in place so they don't have access? Are we removing those barriers? and really looking at not just inviting people to the table for feedback and community and stakeholder engagement, but that they actually have the power and authority within the decision-making process and the planning process to get to the outcomes that we're talking about. So hopefully that kind of sets up a little bit from a regulatory perspective, integrating equity and justice. And I think, if anything, that the key takeaway is the power and decision-making that we all have, given the roles that we are in and the agencies and organizations that we sit in currently. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jen. There's a lot of frameworks around equity. I'm not sure how you all are familiar. I'm just getting up to speed with some of them. But there's the University of Michigan, the ACEEE. They have equity broken into 4 different quadrants, right? Recognition, procedural, distributional, and then restorative. And I think, Jen, what you're talking about with the recognizing piece kind of goes in that first quadrant of, recognizing that there are inequities, recognizing that historically this has been something that hasn't been kind of part of our decision making at all levels, and then kind of the other piece that you mentioned, the engagement with the community kind of gets into the procedural quadrant where we talk about engaging with the communities. And we'll talk more about that, but that's a good framework, Jen, and thank you for setting that up as far as kind of the big equity framework goes. Next, I want to kind of ask Candace about the challenges and solutions and the benefits of embedding, equity and anti-racism in an organization, because I know you talked about how you and your team, your peer John, are working on that at King County.
Yes, I took some notes on this one, not because I was going to forget, but I think there's just an ample amount of information to talk about. So the 2 that I talked about, I would love to focus on when you're talking about challenges. One being just like the resistance to change. I think, as Jen mentioned, a lot of these infrastructures have been traditionally built on systemic racism, and the people who are in leadership or in those places have to actually have that commitment to change. And whenever you may be uncomfortable or don't know how to start, there's a lot of people who are resistant to actually making that change and becoming equitable or being anti-racist. Another thing is just like a lack of awareness. I think a lot of people are in positions, a lot of times when we're talking about racism, it flows from a position of, privilege and positionality of the leadership, and kind of trickles down that way. And so whenever people at the top or who are making the decisions are not aware of like the different impacts and things of that nature, that it actually informs a lot of these decisions, there's no room for change. And so in order for us to actually become anti-racist, you actually, one, have to become aware first and foremost and be willing to make those changes. And so whenever you have that resistance, I think that is a major challenge that a lot of organizations and companies face. When you're talking about solutions, as I said before, I think that there's a big buy-in that has to come from leadership and positions of power that is saying that this is going to be a priority and this is going to be something that's important not only to our organization, but to everybody down from the CEO all the way down to those lower position workers. And so whenever you do these things, I guess the benefits is the last piece of that question. You see your workforce and you see the employees come to life a little bit. So I think that's a big part of my job that I really love is cultivating that culture. And so whenever people see themselves in the work and they see themselves belonging within those structures, it increases, the retention rates of those employees. It enhances the innovation that people are able to have and the creativity that they're going to bring to your workforce whenever they see themselves in these positions and things are being talked about that impact their lives. When we're talking about, equity, I think a lot of times people only focus or have a big focus on like the racial aspect of it, but this equity comes down to everything from gender identity to accessibility for folks who are not traditionally having access to things. And so whenever you see that, I think that your workforce kind of flourishes. So the benefits highly, there's a lot of benefits. And I think that whenever people make the effort and try to do these things, you see it come to life. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, thank you for that, Candace. Candace, I know we were having, during our meet and greet session, we talked about equity and DEI and the difference between the two, because within my organization, when I'm talking about equity to, the different interested parties, they're like, well, we're already equitable because we, hire without names on their resumes, or we have X amount of person of color in our organization, or, we outsource, but that's a little bit different than energy equity, energy justice, right? So briefly, can you kind of help us understand, the two? Because I think you and John kind of complement each other on that as well. So I think it's a good segue for John's next question, potentially on that. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that when we were speaking briefly, we were talking about the difference between like internal equity, innovation, and different things like that nature, and then like the external facing. So King County has around, and you can maybe help me, 16,000 employees, and so a lot of the work that I do within DHR is I would say heavily focused internally. So creating internal, e-learnings and different education opportunities, supporting leadership and management as far as how do they take this work and bring it to their teams in order to be anti-racist or any of those things of the pillars that we stand on. And there's a big portion of it as well that is external facing. When we're talking about King County, is also a huge county as far as the community that we serve. And so whenever we're looking at things such as strategic planning, which John has a lot of expertise on, there's a lot of aspects of that has to come from community. And we were asking community, how is this going to impact you all? How are the things that we're doing as a county and we're going to say as our priorities, how are these going to help and impact the community? So a lot of times there's decisions that are made from government level that does not have the voice of the community that we serve. And I think that at King County we strive to also include the community voice, and so we're not making decisions for community but with community. And that's, I would say, the biggest difference of that internal structure as far as, you can think about hiring practices and some of those transactional things that people think of when they think of equity, as far as, this is what our workforce looks like, this is the percent of people of color that we have, these different things, but there's also a ginormous aspect of it that is external. So if that is your question, I'll let you segue.
Yeah, and John, as we kind of talk about equity and DEI, you mentioned, practices organizations should kind of inherit and execute, right? Can you talk about some of the things that you've done within your organization to, to raise the awareness and, get leadership buy-in, right? Like Candace mentioned, it has to come from the top down, right? So can you talk a little bit more about some of those things you have done?
Absolutely. Appreciate that question, brother. So first off, I just want to just acknowledge I'm not an expert in anything. I am a practitioner. I am constantly learning, right? And I am here to support others in their learning if they want to take the initiative. That being said, when we think about DEI and what's happening in most organizations that have made a commitment to that, and the difference between what we're doing in King County, which is our commitment to become pro-equity, anti-racism, right? It's really, and you got to think about King County is an international leader in this work, and we still kind of suck at it, right? And that says a lot. There's just a lot of work. We're talking about centuries of systems that have been in place that we're trying to transform in a little bit of time, right? And it's causing significant harm. When I think about my organization, I think about my organization is Department of Local Services. So we are responsible for King County's infrastructure arm. We have our permitting, right, where we think about development in our communities, and we have our roads, right? And we are unincorporated King County City Hall. So we have a responsibility to a lot of our community members out there. When you think about the size of unincorporated King County, it is equivalent to one of the largest cities in the state of Washington, when you think about the sheer population, right? When we think about it, right, you really, as sponsors, I'm gonna say, and leaders that are gonna be synonymous in what I'm sharing here, there has to be a commitment to the work, right? And it's just not about diversity and numbers and making sure you have a certain percentage of this identity in your organization and there's balance, right? You have to be intentional around scrutinizing your systems, right? The systems upstream. How many of us watch daily local news and national news, right? Just a show of hands really quick, right? So you are aware of what you're seeing on a daily basis. You're seeing a lot of things in our communities that are really challenging, and they're a little bit scary for some of us. When we talk about the percentage of unhoused, crime rates, right? We're talking about our environment and where we are around the climate crisis that we're experiencing, right? There's a direct correlation to inequities in infrastructure and these outcomes, right? A lot of us tend to think about downstream, more police, more prisons, more this and this to address the folks that have already done the thing. Our focus needs to shift more upstream. What are we doing? It's like you think about a wound. Once you get cut, right? What is the first thing you're going to do when you get cut, right? Do you sit there and you cut more? Do you pour salt in the wound? Or do you stop and maybe you apply a tourniquet and you say, yo, I need to do something to stop more of our population from going into these pipelines, right? That's systems work. And that's some of the things that we're committing to in King County. When we're thinking about going to the communities that we've historically underserved and have marginalized, we're going to them and we're being honest about that, right? We're saying we are complicit. And now we need you to help us understand how we better serve you and deliver more successful outcomes. And that means that we also have to compensate them for their time. We're not saying come volunteer and do this thing for us, show us the way. No, we're going to pay you a solid family living wage to help you come and help us learn how to do the thing, all right? So much to that. I can go on forever, but I got to pause and give space to other folks here.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, John. And it's a good segue into our next theme, which is engagement. And I like what you said. We're constantly learning, right? And this is new for us at PSE. And I'm second in command when it comes to energy equity, which could be a good or a bad thing. But just within the 4 months, I've evolved my knowledge from just being an engineer to now kind of learning a lot more about equity and how it impacts everyone. A lot of the things Jen mentioned and Candace and John. And so. This conversation will be a lot different next year and the following year, and what we've committed at PSC, and I'm sure you all have as well, is we're not going to get this right the first time. If we do, I tell my team this all the time, if we get this right the first time, we messed up. We did something wrong, because this is going to be an iterative process. We're going to learn, we're going to go back to the drawing boards, and it's going to take some time. And so, that's what we're here, right, is we're trying to learn. And whoever turned that clock on, thank you for that, because I'm trying to manage my time, and so now I know that there's a time here versus the Oscars, the music's just going to start playing and I'm not even halfway done. So now we kind of get into the engagement piece, and Brittany, this question is for you. You mentioned that every small project has an engagement stakeholder, right? So can you tell us about that and what you mean?
Sure. So I'll tie in with what Candace was saying about finding the voice of the community. I'll talk about how we even start that from getting a project, why it matters, and just general good tips for finding the voice of the community. In my experience, just as a starting level, mid-level engineer, the way I get projects is my manager will just assign something and say, go forth, make say natural drainage better here. And generally for each city or each area, we have best practices for cost-effective natural drainages. In this example, swales with trees with a walkway next to it. That was a general good natural drainage solution. So for example, when I was working in the Alki beach area, we propositioned the swale with trees. Trees in general are good for the environment. They're carbon scrubbers, they look nice, they increase property value, and they can act as a barrier between pedestrians and cars. So it was well received in the Alki area. When we looked at the Delridge area, for example, we reached out to the homeowners that were potential recipients of the swale and trees combo. We left door tags on there with some contact info if they had any feedback. We actually got an email from them and several calls saying, please come to our Delridge Farmers Market. We have a community of Somali women in the area that want to speak to you. So I went off to this farmers market. I set up my table with examples and an explanation of what are we proposing here. And surprisingly for me, I found out that trees in this community weren't as well received. People in this area perceived trees to provide shade and more cover for suspicious people or hide crime. That's not something a textbook or any guidebook would ever teach you. It's not something I really thought about in my position. But through this experience, through this in-person engagement with the community, I was able to have a wow moment. From there, we were able to shift to giving the community what they want, more street lights, lighting, not shade. Another example is in the Lake City area where I was working to identify drainage problems. We would go on site. We'd see, yes, there's clearly wide streets with drainage issues. But when we knocked on people's doors, when we went to the Lake City Collective, a local community organization, we found out that people in multi-housing apartments or facilities, they highly value street parking. It's free for them. A lot of apartment complexes nowadays charges $100, $200 per month for parking. That's not something a lot of people can easily afford. So having 3 to 4 blocks of free street parking in the area is highly valued. Putting in the swale and tree combo might take away from that. So that was very important factors that we need to identify and find out. And I think having community liaisons within the city to help identify what are the local groups to talk to is very important, and actually touching base with them before just going through the engineering textbook and putting in some solution.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Wow moment for me. I know as a utility, we tend to hide our substations and equipment with trees, and so it's something we should probably talk about and engage with our communities, because you're right. Like, it could be a cover for suspicious activity, and we've started to see our fair shares of vandalism. And so, like I said, always learning, right? So next, Kevin, this is for you. I know you talked about in your talking points how your organization had very little community engagement to now a more robust community engagement plan. So can you tell us what your very little meant and where you're at now, and kind of elaborate on the journey a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a really good segue from what Brittany was just talking about. So before I got there, we didn't do as much community engagement. We were doing this master plan that started in 2015. I think part of the issue was there was like project manager turnover, we had director turnover, and so by the time I got involved in 2019, the project had been going on for a while. So even if communities were engaged at the beginning, by the time we got to, at this point we were at like getting towards the preferred alternatives and really trying to get that last push to get the project kind of complete. And then communities were kind of like, whoa, we haven't heard about this, like, are you going to engage with us? And so that's when I got involved to really kind of re-engage folks so that they could be involved in what remained of the process. And this also spanned into the start of COVID, so that added a whole nother wrench. Couldn't go out physically into the community and work with folks. So what we started to do is we started with, I reached out to our Office of Equity and Social Justice to really get because they're much more closer to kind of different community groups. What are the main community groups that we should reach out to? Because we knew of a handful, but we wanted to make sure that we were reaching all the different folks who wanted to be engaged in the process. And so we reached out to those groups, asked them, okay, who's missing? Like, who's missing from this virtual table? And it really kind of snowballed. They encouraged us to reach out to other folks, who encouraged us to reach out to other folks, and that kind of got us in, developed a community working group for the master plan project, and we met with them, it was during COVID, so virtually on Zoom, every other week for 6 months to first off kind of explain what is a master plan, what can we do within that process, what's kind of out of scope for that process, but we can maybe engage with you in other ways for that, and really rebuild the trust. I think that was the biggest thing, right? Like, they're seeing me at my dining room table in the middle of COVID, like interacting with them, listening to them, and being able to see that not only are we listening, but acting on their suggestions. And through that working group, we were able to find some novel ways to engage with folks. So one of the recommendations was, create a one-pager front and back with what a master plan is, what are kind of the key projects that the communities around our airport would be interested in. And then we translated that into 8 different languages. Another great benefit of this working group is because they were bought into this, they wanted to share it with the communities that they're a part of. We partnered with many different groups, but El Centro de la Raza was a key partner. So again, COVID, it was hard to like get physical papers out right into the community, but we partnered with them to share it with some of the folks they work with. We created an MOU with Refugee Women's Alliance, again, to really try to get at the most marginalized folks. We worked with them to share the information, educate their communities with a trusted partner, with their case managers, and was able to get some really good engagement through that. And then publicize it in some local media that honestly we hadn't heard of before this engagement. So there's like the Georgetown Gazette, which is a small community newspaper that is just shared with folks in, like physically handed out in the Georgetown community. And so we shared information through that, went on local radio stations, and was able to get engagement through these kind of novel ways that I think it was mentioned in the last session, like instead of just paying a consultant to do this work, like we actually engage with the folks. And I think really we're able to get better results because they're the folks who live in the community. And so kind of successes of this, like yes, it took a lot of time, but because it was sustained, we were able to rebuild a lot of that trust with these community members. We also now have a group of really active and engaged folks that we can work with on future projects. And speaking of future projects, we're about to kick off another master plan. The last one took so long, it's time to start another one. But before we even put out the request for proposal, we did some engagement to see what is it that community wants to see even in the community engagement for the project. So we got that, and the information that we heard, we put that directly in the request for proposal, and the folks that are going to be working on our next master plan will, as you can imagine, community engagement is a huge, huge piece of that. So I think I'll leave it there. I think another thing that we learned was based off of that, we started a couple other community working groups on projects that folks were interested in, and they weren't necessarily the really huge runway projects, right? They were air monitors on the airport or a landscape plan. So again, it just really is continuing to bear fruit, even though the bulk of that effort was only about 6 months. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. John and Candace, you guys talked about engagement in your earlier, so I'm going to kind of skip over that for now, just because I'm looking at that clock, and kind of get into the tools and processes. I think as an engineer and technical person, that's really where I also have a lot of interest. But Jen, I know you're at PNNL, and it's a national leading institute when it comes to research. Can you talk about some of the tools and processes that you've helped? I know you guys work with a lot of different private and public organizations as well. So.
Yeah, sure thing. PNNL is one of 17 national labs across the country. We all have a depth and breadth of capabilities and expertise that range many fields and industries. I get the question a lot around equity and justice metrics in terms of energy and environmental justice. And from states and utilities, there's really no silver bullet. I think everybody is really trying to find this silver bullet to measure equitable outcomes, and there really is none. We have industry from an energy and electrical infrastructure and like reporting. We have performance metrics that most industry leaders are familiar with, system averages, whether it's outage duration or frequency. But there's now, I think, an understanding, as I heard earlier, a lot of data, right? And it's understanding, and I love the community component, because the industry, state, and various leaders at all tiers really need to understand the community and the households that they're serving. And that we're trying to incorporate and engage within the planning process and what the impacts are, not at a system level, but at individual household levels. And recognizing that communities aren't monoliths. Tribal communities aren't monoliths, Black and brown communities, immigrant communities are not monoliths. And so it's really, I love the examples that you folks shared, because it really is going to require the industry and state and government leaders to understand communities at a more granular level and personal level than traditionally and historically seen. And that's what we're doing at PNNL right now. In addition to our climate modeling and capability work and grid planning models, I'm an engineer as well. We love models, I love data, but there's a people component and a relationship component and a trust that needs to get built with communities. And some communities, unfortunately, have learned to distrust the industry, the systems, and government. And so it's going to take a lot of effort and time to engage with those people, with our communities, right? Understanding needs and priorities, and those priorities and needs in thinking about metrics and tools and processes may be different than what a state agency and or a utility is going to create in terms of their performance metrics. So, the work that I'm leading on the grid side, we're looking at quantitative, because we love data, but there's also a qualitative component that is more storytelling, more relationship building, more surveying. And so thinking differently and a novel ways of trying to measure progress as we're looking toward equitable and just outcomes within the energy industry. On other aspects in terms of how we're looking at tracking progress in equity and justice, a lot of the metrics are out there through IEJ and University of Michigan and AEEE. I would say is also some of the community work. DOE, Department of Energy, funds a lot of technical assistance programs. The one that I mentioned, Energy Storage for Social Equity, is bridging TA with deployment. So those tools and processes that we're looking at is actually unique across all 14 communities within the program. There's synergies in what we're looking at with the models in terms of microgrids, interconnected, non-interconnected, or islanded. What capacity facilities need, or resilience hubs, or if households don't have service, what does that microgrid and storage system look like? But there's also this recognition that it's not just technical solutions within ES4SC. We have to integrate equity and workforce development. It has to be in conjunction with community benefits and co-develop solutions. It can't be top-down, which we historically have seen, which creates burdens, harms, and consequences. And so I think to answer, the question, Keyshawn, I think is the lab and, partnership with DOE and other state and local agencies, it's really partnering with communities. It is co-collaboration, co-development of solutions, and really building trust as we're moving toward this energy transition. Internally, we've really challenged our internal process from contract management, subcontracting, compensation for communities, and community engagement that may not have been seen from a federal perspective and a lab perspective, and that's something we've been able to incorporate within our community program. So a lot of internal process improvements, as well as challenging, I think, researchers and leaders to think differently in the programs that we're designing and implementing, both at the federal, state, and then local levels.
Cool. Thanks, Jen. Kevin, I know you mentioned the airport has a tool or a process where you optimize capital spending and projects. Can you tell us quickly about that?
Yeah, sure thing. And so it's called the Equity Impact Review Tool, and it's actually a countywide, countywide tool that I've adapted kind of for our project managers to make it a little bit easier for them to fill out. and implement. And I imagine we don't have a ton of time, so I'll just like super high level, kind of the idea of this tool. It is certainly not perfect. It is a start, but it is a way for project managers to, at every stage of the project, from scoping to kind of the alternative design, 30% design phase, to implementation, to then lessons learned. Take time to stop and think first, who are the communities that are being affected, who is benefiting, who is burdened by these projects, and how can we especially address those burdens within the project. I know, I think it was Jennifer earlier was mentioning about adding in sustainability and kind of equity components. And yes, they do cost money, but I think it's just a very important aspect of a project. So I'd be happy to go into more of it later, but it's a way to make sure that the project manager stops and thinks and really does that crucial thought experiment at every stage of the project. To ensure equity is built in. Because, with like Bill and all this infrastructure funding that we're getting, we need to make sure that we're kind of correcting some of those historic inequities. And again, it's not a perfect tool, but it is a step, hopefully, in the right direction.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And Brittany, how about at the City of Bellevue, what are some tools, processes that you all are leveraging?
Okay, super quick. We do evaluations where we can give number scores to things such as requests for crosswalks, and that gets put in big priority lists, and we can rank them based on priority. But that is just the first step, because numerical data doesn't always tell the whole story. We got speed data, we've got traffic data. Those are quite hard set. We have proximity to schools, and we even have census data, but census data can be old and also voluntary at times. So that's just part of the story. I think it's important to be open to pilot projects, recognize the voice of the community if they want new technology, new cool green bus stops, or other factors that isn't just hard set in our guidelines and manuals. Being aware of possibilities and open to trying something new is very good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And with that, we conclude our session. There's a lot. I know this could be an entire conference, right? And so we'll just give you a brief trailer on the work that's being done. And so hopefully you learned. I mean, I did, just standing here, and I've already had the conversation with you all. So thank you all for listening, and feel free to approach any one of us to discuss more about this. So thank you guys.